What's up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Danielle Hallen, and I am back with another true crime video. And before I dive into this absolute twisted, bizarre case, I want to remind you guys that CRIMECON is coming up, and I am so excited. I'm getting all of my goodies ready to give out to you guys, and they've started to announce some insane guests this week that's just been blowing my mind. So John Douglas is actually going to be there, and he has his own special event that you have to buy extra tickets for, and those go on sale next week. So definitely snag your tickets now so you don't miss out on the OG Mindhunter. You guys know my love for John Douglas. The Kowalskis are also going to be there, which is crazy. Denise Huskins and Aaron Quinn will be there. Dr. Michael Baden is going to be there. There are just so many great guests this year. There's going to be a lot to learn, a lot of people to hear from. So grab your ticket. It's coming up next month, May 31st to June 2nd, and you can use my code Hallen to get a nice little discount. So now on to today's case, and you guys just need to go ahead, buckle in, get your snacks, get a drink, get comfortable, because we're going to be here for quite some time. In July of 2021, Krista and Bart Halderson were living their ideal life. They owned a beautiful home in DeForest, Wisconsin, a vacation home at the lake. They both had jobs that they loved and two sons that were excelling in life. It seemed that everything they had worked so hard for was seamlessly coming to fruition. But the weekend of July 4th, the couple mysteriously vanished, and every single trail they left behind went sharply against their morals and just their nature to the core. But the shock of their disappearance was nothing compared to the shock of who was behind it. Bart Halderson was born on May 14th, 1971 in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, to Blake and Kayleen Halderson. He was raised there and attended Valders High School, where he graduated in 1989. And Krista was born on January 25th, 1968, to Andrew and Betty Frater. She attended Madison East High School, where she graduated in 1986. And they came together at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. So this is where their love story began. Krista and Bart ended up getting married on July 30th, 1994, and went on to have two sons. Mitchell, their oldest, and a little over a year later, Chandler. Chandler was 23 years old at the time his family disappeared, and Mitchell was 24. Now, from the outside, the Halderson family was picturesque. You know, Bart and Krista made their family a top priority, and they just played so well off of each other when it came to parenting. Bart was more of like the structured and focused parent, and Krista was the very nurturing and calming and understanding parent. Everyone that has spoken about this couple has commended their patience and their understanding that they somehow managed to show in even the hardest of moments. And as a parent myself, like, we all know how challenging that can be. I feel like that's something we all strive for and have to remind ourselves to do on a daily, if not minute by minute basis. Krista and Bart were just problem solvers. They didn't yell or get out of hand. They faced a problem with their kids and they figured out a solution, and they pushed their boys to achieve their absolute wildest dreams, meeting them with compassion and support at every step. They honestly were such amazing parents. Now, this set their sons up for success. They gave them all the tools they needed to be the best men that they could be. Both Mitchell and Chandler did very well in school. They were active in the Boy Scouts, earning an Eagle Scout badge, and they both had massive aspirations in life. Meanwhile, Bart and Krista continued working on their own dreams. Bart had a passion for woodworking and renovations, and Krista would kind of come in right behind him with her interior design touch. And I know it sounds so cheesy and so cliche to say that they completed each other, but they really did. Like, where one stopped, the other always picked up. They loved to cook with each other. Bart was usually out on the grill while Krista was whipping up dishes in the kitchen. And just like they loved their boys, they loved everyone in their life like family. Krista and Bart were friends for the long haul. They were so attentive and present and always thinking of everyone. They would have friends over for dinner. They went out to football games and concerts. They just loved to have a good time surrounded by great people. Bart's dad said, quote, "They were that special couple down the street that everyone loved, and any parent would be proud to say that is my son or daughter." Now, as their kids grew older, they ended up settling down in a house in Oak Springs Circle in DeForest, Wisconsin. After being a stay-at-home mom for her kids' entire childhoods, Krista decided to take up a job working as a customer service rep for a local body shop. And Bart Bart was a managing director for an international accounting firm, so he was good with his money. And at this point, their oldest son, Mitchell, had moved away. He was working in IT, so busy in his career. He was engaged and so excited to be married. And their youngest, Chandler, who was referred to as Chaz by those that knew him, was enrolled in Madison County College in 2018, studying for an IT degree. And obviously, shortly after that, all hell broke loose in the world, okay? 2020, a pandemic hit, and things changed a lot. So Chandler ended up moving back in with his parents. And at this point in time, pretty much everything anyone was doing was virtual. And in 2021, he only had one more class before he was set to graduate with this IT degree. He was doing great in school. He also had been working virtually with American Family Insurance as an intern. And probably the biggest news in his life is that he had just landed a job with SpaceX, which is massive. And so the summer of 2021, he had plans to move to Florida for this big job with a great salary and his long-term girlfriend, Kat. So you can see how Krista and Bart were probably just so overwhelmed with all of the amazing things their kids were accomplishing, what they had accomplished in their lifetime, and everyone was looking forward to the future. But then came the 4th of July weekend. Friday, July 2nd, 2021. Krista had a scheduled shift at the body shop and she failed to show to it. And as I'm sure you have very likely gathered so far, it was not like Krista to no call, no show, okay? She was described as a helicopter parent, and not just that, she's a helicopter friend, she's a helicopter employee. Like, this woman was on top of absolutely everything, okay? She had narrowed down communication to absolute perfection. So when she didn't show and didn't call, her good friend and coworker Daniel reached out to her to make sure that everything was okay. Now, Daniel patiently waited all day for her to return his call, but got nothing, not even a text. So after his shift, he decided, you know what, I'm picking up my girlfriend. We're heading over to the Halderson home to make sure that everything is okay. Now, when they arrived, Daniel knocked on the door a few times, but no one came to answer. And so he peered in the window to see if there was anything amiss inside. And the only thing that he really noticed was that there was a coffee table leaned over on its side right in the entryway area. And he had been to the Halderson home quite a few times at this point, so he knew the coffee table wasn't supposed to be there. And obviously the fact that it was tipped over on its side was a little strange. But at the same time, the Haldersons were in the middle of home renovations, okay? Bart was like ripping walls out, ripping up the floors. There was only one bathroom working in the house. Like, he was a busybody. And so if you've ever been in a home where renovations are going on, things end up absolutely everywhere, okay? So he figured maybe this just got moved in the chaos of all the renovations. So he took a mental note and just moved on. Now, Daniel next headed to the garage. He wanted to see if Bart and Krista's cars were still there, if they were gone, to try to figure out what may be going on. And to his surprise, both of the cars were parked right inside. And Bart and Krista were pretty particular about driving their own vehicles whenever they went anywhere. So the fact that their cars were there and they weren't answering the door, there were red flags going up left and right. At the time that all of this was going on, there were some medical issues happening with Krista. She had a small stroke at some point in the recent past, and just the week prior, she had been diagnosed with skin cancer. So when you've got someone that's struggling with these medical conditions, they don't show up for work, there could be some sort of medical emergency inside the house that no one knows about. And so he started to make his way around the back of the home to look through more windows, and all of a sudden, Chandler Halderson pops out of one of the side doors of the home. Chandler profusely apologized to Daniel. He's like, I'm so sorry that I didn't answer the door. I just got out of the shower. He was soaking wet, so it made sense. And he basically just asked Daniel, is everything okay? Why are you here looking in my windows? And Daniel told Chandler about his concerns that Krista hadn't shown up for work. He'd not been able to get in contact with her or Bart, but Chandler very quickly was able to dismiss all of Daniel's fears. Chandler told Daniel that his parents had actually left very early that morning because they had to do some emergency repairs at their cabin in White Lake. Now, this cabin is about a 3-hour drive north, and it was a gem for the Haldersons, okay? Krista's grandfather actually built this cabin himself in the 1940s, so it was a very special heirloom for her and her family. And also, Bart and Krista were just notorious in general for taking great care of everything of theirs, their cars, their homes. Everyone that spoke about them said that they were very meticulous about their lawns. They were always out there doing yard work, putting flowers, mowing the grass. So it wasn't really that strange that they would immediately kind of up and leave to fix his cabin if something was going on. Chandler proceeded to explain to Daniel that there had been pretty bad storms up that way, and there were issues with potentially the water pump being broken, the fire pit got destroyed, so his parents had to go and fix all of this and then plan to just enjoy the rest of the 4th of July weekend out on the lake. Now, this still didn't really explain to Daniel, though, why Krista wouldn't call to say she wasn't coming in. Knowing her, she probably would have even waited until after work to leave, but she definitely would have called bare minimum. However, understandably, after hearing the possible issues going on, a water issue in the cabin could be disastrous, so maybe it was possible she had just been so flustered that she just forgot. But if they went to the cabin, why were both of their cars still there? Like, there were just still aspects of this story that made absolutely no sense. Chandler explained that his parents had actually been picked up by another couple that planned to go with them, and he said they took the couple's car instead. But when Daniel pushed for more information, Chandler really didn't have any. He had no idea who this couple was that they left with. He didn't know what car they were in, and he woke up at around 6:15 shortly after he believed his parents and this couple left. So at this point, Daniel headed home thinking that everything was fine, and it was kind of a better safe than sorry scenario. He was happy he went over there. He felt he got some sort of answers, but there was just this nagging gut feeling, okay? So over the weekend, Daniel continued to text and call the couple. He wanted to hear from them personally that everything was fine. But every single text and call continued to go unanswered. Daniel reached out to Chandler, hoping that maybe he had heard from his parents or knew when they planned to be back, just something to ease his worries. But Chandler was just as much in the dark as Daniel was. But Chandler was more reassuring. He told Daniel this was normal. You don't need to panic. Service at the cabin, I guess, was always spotty, especially when it stormed. Things got so much worse. Like, any cloud coverage just totally shot away any chance of having signal. So Chandler said that they likely wouldn't hear anything from his parents until they managed to get that service back, and there really was no way to predict when that was going to be. And by Sunday, July 4th, Chandler reached out to Daniel with great news. He's like, finally, I've heard from my parents. Chandler told Daniel that he got a text from his mom, Krista, and she told him that they arrived safe and sound to White Lake and they planned to go to a 4th of July parade later that day. She just seemed in a great mood and everything was fine. And she also confirmed that they would be home either late Monday night or early Tuesday morning. So Daniel at this point was just absolutely relieved and looking forward to speaking to Krista when she got back to work. Now, obviously, Monday rolled around and Krista didn't show up to her shift again. And while she had said she wouldn't be back until late Monday, early Tuesday, it still just wasn't sitting right that she didn't call for a second time to notify anyone she wouldn't be there. But Daniel, again, was just thinking, okay, maybe it's just the service. I feel like this was just one of those situations where when someone does something so against their character, you're going to come up with so many different reasons that, or circumstances that could be preventing it that make sense and comfort you. And I feel like that's exactly what Daniel was doing. But nobody had any idea how horrible those circumstances actually were. And by Tuesday, July 6th, when Krista didn't show for the third day and she was supposed to be home at this point, Daniel put his foot down. He's like, nope, something is not right. Not only had she not shown up when she said she would, but she also had a doctor's appointment that day, and it was a big one. This doctor's appointment was in regards to her skin cancer, and she had been anxiously waiting for this appointment. It was the one where they likely would figure out a treatment plan and bring some sort of peace to her worried mind, and she had spoken to multiple people that she wanted to get to this appointment. She wanted to get it over with. So the fact that she missed it was really just the last straw. Daniel reached out to Chandler again, and now Chandler seemed to be just as worried. So around 11:30 a.m. on Wednesday, July 7th, Chandler walked into Dane County Sheriff's Department, and an investigation started that turned into the craziest, most twisted thing that I have ever heard. Chandler told the sheriff's department exactly what he told Daniel, that he last saw his parents at dinner on Thursday, July 1st, and he said that they planned to take this emergency trip to the cabin, and he said that he had even helped them pack things up. He then told them that they must have left sometime between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. on the 2nd, because anything before 4 a.m. was just way too early, and he woke up at 6:15 and they were already gone. So at least they had somewhat of a time frame to go by. He even showed police the text that his mom sent him on Sunday explaining that the service was bad, and he told them, he wasn't initially worried, but at this point, they didn't show up at home when they said they would, and also both of their phones were going straight to voicemail. Chandler told authorities that even if his parents had gotten stuck or something had happened at this point, his mom would have found a way to reach out to him and check on him. That is just how she was. And on top of that, he explained to them that he had recently suffered a head injury back in June, and his mom had been very worried about leaving him alone that weekend. So this just all added to the suspicious nature of their disappearance. Every single thing happening was totally out of character for Bart and Krista. So right away, Dane County Sheriff's Department went out to the Halderson home to see if there were any clues as to where the couple may have gone, and hopefully the identity of this mystery couple that they left with. Now, Chandler had given authorities a short list of names of people that it may have been, but he couldn't say for certain. And something that the authorities were really holding on to is the fact that if the Haldersons were missing, then this other couple likely was too, and hopefully someone would report them missing as well, and this would help answer questions all around. Now, when officers arrived at the tri-level home the Haldersons lived in, nothing really seemed to be out of place. There was obvious construction going on, and also signs that a 23-year-old had been alone in the house for a few days. Chandler showed them his parents' room upstairs, the kitchen, the living room, and also a note that his mom had left him on the dining room table. This note basically said, if you need anything, call this person, and it had a phone number. Chandler said this was just another sign that his mom was worried about leaving him for a few days, so them failing to show back up at home was bizarre. Chandler was able to show the officers as well specific things around the home that had been taken to the cabin. He listed off every single tool that he helped pack. He told the police that he had personally divided up his mom's medicine in little Ziploc bags, and she had enough to get her through to July 10th. I mean, he literally was able to give them detail by detail all of the things leading up to them heading to the cabin. Chandler said there really wasn't anything that he noticed that was strange after they left for the cabin, other than just one unlocked door. He told authorities that the door from the basement to the driveway had been unlocked when he woke up that morning. And this was just strange because his parents were usually pretty crazy about making sure they locked doors behind them, specifically that door. So officers obviously wanted to go down to the basement to see this door and try to get an idea if maybe this was related. But Chandler seemed a little bit hesitant to take them down there. Now, ultimately, he did end up leading the way, but officers noted that he kept the lights very dim the entire time. So they had a bit of a difficult time seeing things clearly. When authorities got down to the basement, it was obvious that Chandler had basically been living in the basement the whole weekend. So maybe that was why he was acting a little strange about going down there. He had kind of created a fort for himself by pushing two couches together. And he ended up explaining to police that he had been sleeping down there because of this head injury that he had. He said that that was the only working bathroom in the house because of the construction, and he struggled with walking. He was struggling with nerve pain in his legs, so it was just easier to be down there without his parents being there to help him. Now, they continued to look around the basement. It was very organized and clean. They did notice some cleaning supplies, and most things appeared to be in order, but there was one thing that stuck out. The fireplace in the bottom level of the home, the left pane in that fireplace was shattered. Chandler, however, said he had a completely logical explanation for this. He claimed that he had been playing with the two family dogs and a ball accidentally hit and shattered the glass. And he said that one of the dogs had even run into the glass trying to get the ball, which just furthered the damage. And he was even able to show the officers a wound that he had on his foot that he said he got while cleaning up the mess. And I mean, he went into detail again, and he's like, I was trying to get the glass out of my foot. I got blood everywhere. It's everywhere from the, fireplace to the bathroom to the kitchen. And he told them that he had grabbed some hydrogen peroxide and cleaned it all up because he was worried his dad was going to get mad at him for the mess. So officers were like, all right, whatever. Another mental note, and they decided to move on. Now, there was one other place that they had not checked out yet, and that was the garage. And Chandler was, again, hesitant to let them in there because he said this is where he had been keeping the dogs so they wouldn't get in the way of the search. Chandler explained that both of the dogs that they had were very skittish. One of them had come from a questionable home prior and was still somewhat of a puppy, and so he was like, they're going to bark at you, they might jump on you. He just seemed uncomfortable letting the dogs out or letting the authorities in with the dogs. But they're like, look, we insist, they can't miss a room while searching an entire home, especially where his parents' cars were. And so Chandler ended up agreeing, moved the dogs, and they went into the garage. And just like the basement and every other area of the home, things appeared to be in order, and only one thing was missing. And Chandler very quickly pointed it out. Bart and Krista had things so organized, which you will see from video footage, photos, like everything is in matching totes with labels perfectly stacked and organized, okay? And according to Chandler, they never left anything at the cabin. Instead, they kept all of their supplies in a tote that they could just easily throw into the car before they left. And that tote was missing, which again just seemed to further indicate that they did have intentions of going to the cabin. So at this point, authorities are like, all right, we've found what we can in the house. There are all these signs they did in fact leave for the weekend. They wanted to start gathering surveillance footage from nearby homes, and also they wanted to start speaking to the couple's friends, hoping that they may be able to piece together a timeline of when the couple left and who this mystery couple was that picked them up, because that seemed to hold all of the answers. But when they started calling around to these different friends that Chandler had listed out for them, none of them were with Bart and Krista, and every single one of them expressed utter shock that the couple would up and leave, first of all, on such short notice, and second of all, apparently with friends that nobody else knew of. Everything in their life had a time, a place, a purpose. This whole thing didn't sound right. And one of the couples that Bart and Krista may have been with was the Hilgendorf family. Had been friends with Miss Hilgendorf for decades, and so they kind of adopted each other as family. They were referred to as aunt and uncle by the boys, and the Hilgendorf's two daughters were like cousins to Mitchell and Chandler as well. The Hilgendorfs also shared a love for the lakes in Wisconsin, and they had their own cabin relatively close to the Haldersons. I think it may have been like an hour or maybe a little over an hour away. Mr. Halderson ended up hearing that Bart and Krista went missing first, and he immediately told his wife in a panic. So Ms. Hilgendorf reached out to Mitchell to try to figure out what is going on. And to her shock, he didn't even know at this point that his parents were missing. So next she decided to call Chandler. Since he still lived at the home with them, maybe he would have more information, but Chandler seemed just as confused as everybody else. Now, he told her everything that he'd told everyone else so far, but he also started to say things that just sounded so unlike his parents. Chandler told Miss Hilgendorf that his parents had packed up a ton of liquor and money before they left, and he believed that they had likely gone off to gamble. Miss Hilgendorf legitimately scoffed at this because Bart and Krista, first of all, were not heavy drinkers at all. If they did drink anything, it was a glass of wine at a social event, definitely not liquor. And also, Bart worked in finances. He did not mess around with money. Like I said, everything at a time, a place, and a purpose. Their money was no different. It was either being saved or it was going towards something specific. There was no way that he was going to just go off gambling, even more so when they were mid-home renovation. It made no sense. It literally went against Bart's being. So the Hilgendorfs at this point are like, that's kind of weird, but we will go and drive out to the White Lake cabin to check on Bart and Krista, because the Hilgendorfs were actually at their own cabin, so they were the closest, and they also knew where this cabin was. They were familiar with its typical state. It just kind of made sense to do this. So they packed up and headed out, and when they got there to the cabin, they called Chandler so that he could be on the phone as Mr. Hilgendorf was checking the property. And to them, everything appeared untouched. They sent Chandler photos showing that the grass was still long, the tree trunk that they placed over the driveway as security was still there. There were no signs at all that Bart and Krista had ever arrived to this cabin. So why had Krista texted Chandler on Sunday saying they made it to White Lake when they clearly were never there? And then, as I like to call it, the day of chaos ensued. July 8th, the day after the couple was reported missing, it was all hands on deck. Chandler started off the morning bright and early, like 8 a.m., going door to door, asking his neighbors if they had any surveillance at all that captured his mom and dad leaving between 4 and 6 a.m. the previous Friday, because again, they're trying to figure out what car they're looking for. And Mitchell had picked up some keys from Chandler that possibly would unlock the White Lake cabin, and he decided he and his fiance were going to make the 3-hour trek north to check it out for themselves, and they planned to meet up with the Langlade County Sheriff's Department to assist in the search of this property. Now, when they got there, they found the cabin in the exact same state the Hilgendorfs did. They walked the entire property, they checked out the shed out back, they ensured that all of the kayaks or canoes, whichever they had, were still there, which they were. But unfortunately, the keys that Chandler had given them didn't work to open the cabin. So because, again, there could be a medical emergency or you never know what's going on, maybe this couple had weird, horrible intentions, the deputies decided to go ahead and just break down the door of the home. And the inside confirmed the same exact thing the outside did. Nobody had been to this cabin in a very long time. There was no luggage, there was no food in the fridge, there was nothing. And the Haldersons had almost been at this cabin, or were supposed to have been at this cabin, for almost a week at this point. And even more alarming, when they did a little digging, they found that there hadn't even been a 4th of July parade in White Lake. So the entire text from Krista to Chandler was not adding up.
Authorities are still searching for a Windsor couple who have not been seen in days. 50-year-old Bart Halderson and his wife, 53-year-old Krista, were supposed to travel north last week and return home on Tuesday.
But their son tells Tony Galley his parents' whereabouts are unknown.
Bart and Krista Halderson of Windsor had plans for the 4th.
Their plans were going up with their friends and do some minor repairs on our cabin.
That cabin is some 3 hours away from Windsor on a lake in a small community in Langlade County.
Did you literally see them pulling out of the driveway heading out?
No.
Their son, Chandler Halderson, who asked to be off camera, says whoever his parents were traveling with from this neighborhood were to do the driving. He says he received a text from his mother.
She got back to me on Sunday, said they made it safely.
That's the last he's heard from his parents. Neighbor Brett Schuster's reaction to the Haldersons' disappearance.
Wow. You know, my wife is pretty shook up too. I mean, they're a very nice couple, very nice family.
Detectives now go door to door here.
While sheriff's personnel here in Dane County are checking for any and all information, the missing couple's son says law enforcement in Langlade County has checked on the family's cabin there. And he says that visit only adds to the mystery.
The sheriff said it looked like there wasn't anyone home.
Family and friends hope the Haldersons' unexpected extended time away is just that, and not a sign they're in trouble. In Windsor, Tony Galley, 27 News.
And as they are finding out this information, Dane County Sheriff's Department gets a huge unsettling tip. They received a call from Chandler's girlfriend's mom. She said that she had some information that possibly could help the investigation because something really weird happened on her property just a few days prior. She began to explain that Chandler and Kat had spent the day at her farm where she and her partner lived on July 4th. And this farm is about 20 or so miles away from the Halderson's home in Cottage Grove. It's pretty rural, it's a large piece of land, so it's a fun place to spend some time, especially for outdoor holidays like that. They have a pool. It's just a good time. And according to her, the day was pretty average. Chandler had complained some about that head injury, but that was pretty much it. However, just before leaving, Chandler ended up pulling his girlfriend's mom's partner aside and asked for her personal number. And he just began to explain that he wanted to be able to reach out and ask them if he could use his pool, days that Kat was working, things like that. He didn't want to just show up, so it just sounded like a polite gesture of asking permission. And so they ended up giving him the number. Now, the following day of July 5th, Kat's mom said she was out of the house, and all of a sudden her partner called and was like, Chandler just pulled up in our driveway. Now, he had called, like he said, ahead of time. He called their landline. This call ended up being missed. Now, Chandler ended up saying, hey, I hope I can use the pool because he claimed he was having a pretty rough day. Kat's mom rushed to the house to be able to make sure everything was all right. And when she arrived, they both kind of asked him, what is going on? Like, they said his demeanor was just super strange. He seemed out of it. Like, he was just like not there. And he basically said his life was falling apart. But before I can get into the details that he gave deeper, I need to tell you guys a little bit more about Chandler's head injury and how it kind of had affected his life over the past month and all of the chaotic things that were going on for him during this summer. Now, Chandler, as I told you in the very beginning of this video, had been offered a job at SpaceX, and he had plans to move to Florida that June, so a month prior to when all of this happened. But right as he was reaching the time to leave, his brother Mitchell ended up in the hospital and was ultimately diagnosed with diabetes. Chandler was devastated. He was very close to his brother and he refused to leave for Florida while his brother was unwell. He's like, nope, can't do this. I have to be here for my family. So he made the decision to push back the move and tell the job he would have to come at a later date. Now, Kat was supposed to move with him, okay? They had a whole conversation about it. They had been looking at homes on Zillow. She knew what his salary was going to be. They were planning Disney trips with friends and family and all of these things. And this was a pretty big deal and a big step for the both of them. I mean, they had to have a heart-to-heart conversation of, are you sure this is what we want? Like, we want to basically start our life together more formally. And they both agreed this was exactly what they wanted. Kat had even been looking for schools down there. Chandler had decided to purchase his own car down there. She was going to bring hers. But Kat wasn't able to move down to Florida with him until August because that's when her apartment lease was up. So there was just like a lot of different things in motion at the time, a lot of planning going on, a lot of big life changes. And Chandler had offered to try to support her through all of this to make it less difficult for her. He promised her he would send her money and help her with the move, and he would come back for the weekends to be able to spend time with her. But then after this whole debacle with his brother, Chandler ended up having his accident. So the night of June 16th into June 17th, Chandler ended up falling down the stairs at his home, and his dad took him to the ER because his head had been hit multiple times. He was complaining of neck pain. And when he got there, Chandler ended up getting a CT scan, a neck brace, the whole 9 yards. And when he came home, everyone was so worried about him. His mom was like even more of a helicopter mom, trying to make sure that he was okay. And he began to tell everybody in his family, everyone in his life, exactly how bad the fall was. Chandler had a very bad concussion. He had hemorrhaged. He hurt his neck that had caused severe nerve pain in his legs. It was affecting his walking. At times, Chandler would complain of issues with numbers and letters. He wasn't allowed to drive long distances according to his doctor. He wasn't allowed to walk too far. And he had several follow-up appointments where he was basically told, your leg damage, from the nerve issue is permanent. Like, we can't do anything about it. And not just that, Chandler told everyone that he was told by doctors that he would have to have surgery, some kind of surgery where they drilled a hole in his head. And that's very scary. And not just that, I guess some of the nerve issues also made it possible that he would need a colostomy bag. I mean, it was a whole laundry list of issues that this fall created that would impact his life pretty significantly. This was like a life-altering accident. So when he showed up to the farm on July 5th, fast forward back in time, this is why he was so upset. He had apparently had a doctor's appointment that day, and it pretty much confirmed a lot of those awful medical nightmares that I just spoke to you guys about, and it unfortunately cost him his position at SpaceX. His doctors told him there's no way you can fly down there, there's no way you can drive a car all the way down to Florida, and SpaceX was basically like, look, we have already been holding your job and we just can't hold it anymore. So now it made perfect sense why Chandler was so devastated and upset that day. And Kat's family was actually pretty upset that his family had just decided to leave him alone while he was struggling, while he had this severe head injury and medical issues happening, to go to the lake. And they began brainstorming ways to help him themselves because, again, life-altering issue. Because after all, Kat had been preparing for months to up and leave to another state. I mean, this was going to change everything. So they had no issue with him going back to their pool to clear his mind, and they were just going to stay inside and figure out ways to help both Chandler and Kat move forward from this point. Now, after about an hour, Chandler hadn't come back yet, and so they figured that they would go and check on him. And the way that their property is laid out, the house is off of the road, and there's like a thick line of trees. And behind those trees is a massive opening, like a huge field. And this is where they had their pool, their barn, there was a small shed. And so they hopped on their riding lawnmower and drove on back to the pool area. And to their surprise, Chandler wasn't there. And the cover to the pool was actually still on it, so he hadn't been there. So what exactly was Chandler doing this entire past hour? Now, when they looked around, they noticed that Chandler's car was parked quite a ways down past the barn by this little shed that they had. And at this point, they're both kind of irritated, okay? Because they had wanted to use the pool. They were trying to do something nice for Chandler. Like, it was kind of already awkward because Chandler never came to their house by himself before. He was only ever with Kat. So it was just a new weird situation. And now he's just kind of sketchily hanging out in their field, not doing what he said he was going to do. They legitimately were like, he's over there doing drugs. Like, that's what's happening. He's over there using drugs, so we have to go and stop him. So they went over to where his car was parked, and again, there's no Chandler. His car is backed up to the tree line with the trunk open, and he is nowhere to be found. So at this point, they're like, okay, maybe he just decided to take a walk instead through the pretty woods, and he will come back to the pool eventually. They tried to, bring themselves down a little bit, and they decided while he's not in the pool, they were going to go in the pool and cool off. And shortly after they decided to do this, out comes Chandler from the woods, and he's shirtless. Now, without saying much at all, he just kind of got into the pool. He just was off in his own world. Kat's mom said that he didn't explain where he had gone. He just started to wash himself off. You guys, he was scrubbing. This is the motion that they use, scrubbing his upper body for like 15 minutes. And then suddenly it was like he snapped back to reality and was lucid again. It was like he came out of some bizarre dream state. At this point, he just kind of got out, said thank you, and left. The entire thing was just so freaking weird. So when they heard that his parents were missing and he hadn't mentioned it at all, he was behaving really odd, he disappeared with his car backed up to the tree line, they're like, what was that about? Authorities immediately sent officers out to the farm to start searches at this point. They were starting to question everything that Chandler had told them. And it wasn't even just because Kat's family was saying, like, Chandler was acting weird. Pretty much everyone they spoke to was saying that. And that's not a good sign. The Hilgendorfs ended up bringing up a strange statement that Chandler had made to them the night that he reported his parents as missing. So if you remember, again, he reported them as missing. The Hilgendorfs found out and they drove to the cabin to check on everything. And they called Chandler while they were doing this. And when Mrs. Hilgendorf was saying that Mr. Hilgendorf wasn't finding anything, all of a sudden, Chandler very specifically asked, well, do you see any like shotgun shells or blood? And Miss Hilgendorf is like, come again? Like, what'd you say? It just felt like such a bizarre thing and specific thing for him to ask, because in their minds, they are looking for his parents who went to a place that they love. They weren't there looking for potential signs of a murder or something. Like, everyone's thoughts are medical emergency, something happened, that kind of thing. Not like they were shot and killed. Just totally felt off base. The Hilgendorf's daughters, who were like cousins to Mitchell and Chandler, also had decided to go over to the Halderson home that night as well. They had gone to get groceries when they ended up hearing about Bart and Krista going missing. And they're like, we've got to drop everything. We'll take our groceries over to Chandler. We'll make him dinner and make him feel better, because that's just what good people do. And they ended up arriving while officers were still at the home. And they said that the moment they got there, Chandler was just not acting himself. Now, obviously, when you are experiencing something like this, you know, it's not every day that your parents go missing, you're probably going to act a little bit strange. But this was just a different kind of weird. Like, it wasn't, oh, he's acting off because he's stressed and worried that his parents are missing. It just, something wasn't quite connecting there. Chandler was described by pretty much everyone that had come in contact with him over those few days as being emotionally flat. The Hilgendorf daughters said that his vibe was so off, and he ended up just chalking it up to his concussion. He said, my head hurts, I'm tired, I haven't eaten, all things that, you know, make sense. He hasn't slept. So they tried to push past this bad feeling to be there for him. Now, they didn't end up making him dinner because he already had plans to go to a neighbor's house that had offered to help out. So they just tried to emotionally be there for a while, but their stages continued to get stranger. Chandler told them all about his parents leaving with this mass amount of alcohol and cash, and said, yeah, they're at a casino probably having the time of their life. And this just dumbfounded them. They knew Bart and Krista just as well as everyone else, just like their own parents. And they knew there was no way Bart and Krista packed up alcohol and money and left. Krista called both of her kids once, if not multiple times a day. That's just how she was. Chandler also seemed like concerned about very strange things, like fixated on small things that didn't matter. Like, he kept talking about how he needed to ask the neighbor to mow the lawn for him because when he did it, it like shook his head too much and hurt his head, so he wasn't able to. It was just kind of weird. Like, he just, odd timing, it just felt icky. Like, it was just gross. And then when all of the officers finally left, they both got this overwhelming feeling that they weren't safe. They wanted to leave, so they did. Now, after this, Chandler, like I said, ended up going over to a neighbor's house. This neighbor told police that they had heard about the disappearance, and they decided to reach out to Chandler to offer to bring him some food. And he said that he would rather come over to their house to eat. So they're like, okay, well, we weren't expecting that, but you know, come on over, we'll do what we can. And this neighbor claims that the entire visit was uncomfortable from start to finish. Chandler was again very flat emotionally, and the only time that he seemed to come alive and show any sort of emotion was when he spoke about the dogs being locked in the garage during all of the searches. And the wife thought, that is so bizarre that you don't get emotional about your parents being missing. You kind of just like zone out when you talk about that, but then you're losing it over your dogs. And when the husband ended up leaving to go and pick up pizza, Chandler just continued speaking. And I mean, it was just like word vomit. He was talking about the alcohol again and the cash and the casino. And the wife got so upset that she had to just go into a completely different room. She could not be in the same room as Chandler because everything he was saying felt so wrong. She knew Bart and Krista, and this went entirely against them as people in in every single way. And she just had a really bad gut feeling about Chandler and also just was not feeling safe around him. But it was one specific statement that really hit home for her. The couple had tried to reassure Chandler, telling him that the police would be able to track his parents' phones and figure out where they were to bring them home, and all he said was, "No, they can't." More neighbors started to come forward, saying that Chandler had been going door to door, personally asking for surveillance footage. And again, you can easily see how this could just be a sign that he's concerned and he's trying to help out and get answers. But to many, again, the vibe was just off. It seemed like he was fishing instead and not genuinely concerned that it caught his parents, but that it caught something else. Anytime someone would give him some sort of reassurance, he would always just shut it down with some strange comment. The moment that anyone would tell Chandler that they had surveillance and police had already come to get it, he would all of a sudden perk up and get all panicky and frantically ask if the cameras captured anything. He'd be like, "Oh, did it have a view of the house? What was the view of the house? Where did you see? What did it capture? Was someone on there?" Someone also tried to tell Chandler, that other couple, was likely missing with his parents. It may help lead to information. And what he said about this was so incredibly strange. He tried to say, well, the other couple probably just continued their trip. And that makes no sense. Everyone that knew Bart and Krista strongly disagreed with the idea they left for the cabin. Not only were they the kind to plan, like I've already said, but the way that they left also made no sense. They typically would take the dogs with them, so why didn't they this time? They also always took their car because of the amount of supplies they needed to take down. Krista would also never no-call, no-show. She would never be out of contact with her kids for this long. She even would usually pre-make meals for the kids if she went out of town, and that hadn't been done. With all of this collecting, the math was not mathing. Meanwhile, the search began at the farm. And as I said, this was a day of chaos. Authorities went right back to the area where Kat's family said Chandler had parked his car, which, by the way, he had been driving his dad's Subaru. Officers could clearly see the tire tracks through the long grass. They were able to see exactly where he pulled up at the tree line. And on the other side of that, they noticed that there was a large matted down area. The grass was pretty tall, so it was easy to see. And that large matted area led to a smaller matted down trail that led directly into the woods. So they decided to follow this trail, and not even very far at that. They noticed an unnatural area of sticks and leaves and debris, and under that, there was a human torso. The torso was male, and there was what appeared to be a gunshot wound. This person had been murdered and dismembered. And the torso was wrapped in a pair of cargo pants, a black belt, a rope. And while they had not formally identified the remains, obviously DNA tests take a little longer than a couple of minutes, they had a good idea of who this was. They started to search more around the property, hoping to find the rest of this person's remains, but nothing was turning up. Instead, they ended up finding an old oil drum right beside where Chandler had parked the car. And inside of this oil drum was a pair of scissors, saws, and what appeared to be handles from a bolt cutter. And all of these items had a substance on them that just confirmed they were very likely the tools used in the dismemberment and mutilation of the torso that they had just found. And common sense just really led them to the answers that they knew would more formally come later, because the only way to get to this area would be to go down the driveway past Kat's family's house, like around the back of their home to this field. The other side of that was like wildlife state-owned land. So only so many people could have done this. So they went to the Halderson's home at this point to bring Chandler in for questioning. And they weren't telling him anything at all at this point. They weren't telling him that they found remains or that they knew about the farm. Their lips were sealed, and Kat was also at the house. So they're like, we're bringing her in because she might have information as well. Chandler ended up calling investigators like as they're on the way to get him, and he was panicked.
I got two squads parked right outside my house, and they're not really canvassing, they're just kind of sitting there. Is everything all right?
Yeah, I mean, they're in the area doing canvassing, and they're also probably doing a shift change right now, getting our second shift crew on around 3:30.
Oh, there's four now. Something going on that we need to know?
Well, they're probably doing reports. They're probably doing shift change. You know, they've been going around trying to get a hold of neighbors, so I'm wondering if they're in the area trying to catch people now that they're coming home from work. I'm not sure. I haven't talked to any of them in just a little while.
A little confused.
And again, you could take it one way to say, hey, he's just concerned they found something and wants answers, or he's a little worried they found something and are coming for him. And when they brought him and Kat into the station, he was still pretty much only focused on what they may have found and also apparently what Kat was saying. Now, when they walked the two of them in, he was able to see where Kat went in this room. He went in the room right beside her. And on the footage, like when they put him in the room, they capture everything on camera. He's sitting there for a while and then he just like presses his ear up to the wall, like he's hoping to hear what they're talking about. I couldn't believe that when I saw it. And when they came in to speak to him, the first thing out of his mouth is there a warrant to search my home? He just starts rambling again about all the officers that had shown up, and they told him that they had found something, or someone mentioned they had found something, which I think he was making that up. But anyways, I digress. He was like, no, but they went inside the house. Like, what did they go in there for? I was leaving when they did it. He's just freaking out. But authorities were playing it so cool. They were brushing it off. They're like, chill. We just want to talk through the events of the weekend again, because at this point they'd not formally like questioned him in the station. So for 2 hours, Chandler was questioned. Now, meanwhile, Kat was next door, also giving authorities a timeline of the weekend and a backstory on her and Chandler. Kat went into details about their relationship and their plans to move to Florida. She spoke about his head injury, how it had been impacting his life, and she said that the week leading up to the 4th of July, Chandler had actually been grounded for reasons unknown. And she said that she was upset because she wanted to see him, but she was excited because they should be able to hang out that 4th of July weekend. And she told authorities that she had specifically asked Chandler, and there's evidence through text, if his family had plans to go to the cabin that weekend. And Chandler told her no. So they instead made plans to go to her family farm. Kat said that she worked all day on the 1st, and then on the 2nd, she ended up getting a text from Chandler. And this would have been the day that his parents up and left to the cabin. He explained to her that he had hurt his foot and needed to clean up the mess, so he asked her to bring him a Swiffer and some hydrogen peroxide. And if I'm remembering correctly, he had told authorities that he had broken the glass while his parents were still home. So it's just interesting that he all of a sudden needed to clean it up when he's talking to Kat, like it happened the day that they had already left. Kat told authorities that she grabbed these things from her mom's house and dropped them off to Chandler in a Target bag that she just reused from a grocery order she picked up, I think, the day before. Now, over the course of that weekend, she stayed with him at his house 2 nights. Then they obviously spent the whole day of the 4th of July together at her mom's, and then that same night, they actually went over to Daniel, that coworker's house, to watch fireworks. I don't think she said that she noticed anything odd, so she seemed kind of blindsided when authorities asked her if she believed Chandler could have possibly done something to his parents. Kat adamantly said no. She told authorities that he had way too much going for him to throw all of it away doing something stupid. He was 1 class away from graduation, like not everyone gets a job at SpaceX, so clearly she didn't know anything yet that job was no more. She said that his parents always doted on him. They were always so close. He played Mario Kart with his parents and cooked with them. They would make root beer floats. They were always supportive of him, so she saw no reason that he would want to harm them. But she also told police that Chandler had just been gifted a gun the month prior. Chandler had befriended a young man in the military while gaming online, and I guess in mid-June they decided to meet in person, and this friend gifted him a gun, and Kat wasn't sure exactly what kind of gun it was. She said that she knew it wasn't a shotgun, but it was something along the lines of a quote army gun. Chandler's interview was very interesting, okay? I highly suggest you guys go and watch the whole thing because I personally find his body language to be very telling and very fascinating. Chandler started telling the police an overview of his weekend yet again, starting with the day that he last saw his parents, Thursday the 1st. And like he had before, he gave them every single detail down to the temperature that his dad set the grill on to cook dinner, where and when his dad put his phone down to charge.
By the way, a detective at my house said something's happened, and while we were leaving, people were going inside. Is there a warrant for my house?
Should there be?
No, I'm just wondering if...
Okay.
Can we go in?
As far as I know, they were at your house and they were going to be there talking to you to ask if you would come up here and talk to us.
But Officer Haley just like walked pretty much in to the gate, you know, the gate on the outside. She just kind of walked in. I was wondering if...
Was that when you were getting your wallet?
No, we were I was in the car waiting to leave. I was just wondering if everything's okay, because she said something's happened.
Okay.
And we need to go down.
Alright, I'll find out what that's about.
Well, has anything bad happened? Oh,
not sure. Alright, so when... Does he ever cook?
I haven't seen him cook. Oh, he grills. He likes to grill. He grilled on Thursday.
Nice. Alright.
I think I told one officer the green egg he got. It makes terrible food, but yeah.
Dad does?
Yeah. Oh, the green egg. Itself,
oh, the green egg. That's like a grill or something?
Yeah, it's insulated and makes everything smoky.
Oh, okay.
It's Thursday morning. I wake up.
What time you think?
6.
Okay.
Dogs.
We talked about that yesterday. 6 a.m. is kind of your deal, right? 6 a.m.
Yeah, that internal clock now.
Yeah.
I haven't used the thing for a while.
Right.
6. Sorry, I'm really trying to work the memory.
That's fine.
Then, yeah, we went to go do our own things. I went back to a little bit more job searching. This time I branched into DeForest instead of just Windsor looking. He went back to work. We planned on something went well. Oh, we were I don't know, something went well for him. So that's all. Then we were hanging out again. My mom texts. I believe I texted her everything's going well. His phone died, my dad. He didn't believe. He just kind of like charged it, put it on the dock, and left it. Then we just kind of hung out, and my mom gets home, and I start shrimp scampi for my dad, because that's what he wanted, but we didn't have shrimp, so I made shrimpless scampi. That's where they told me while we were eating it, they were gonna go with their friends, and I was like, oh, cool.
And they said they were going to the cabin.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
We're going up north. That's how they
friends,
referred to it.
Who said that, mom or dad?
Ma. My dad doesn't talk while he eats.
Okay.
So there we are at Thursday dinner, up north of the cabin. my dad says, I'll need a set for pipe repair and gas. So I'm like, all right. I grabbed the pipe repair stuff from his plumbing chest, or plumbing box. It's like a tote of what you need for pipe repair. And 2 whatever jerry cans, I can't remember the amount, but they're red with the safety nozzles. Got those squared away. They had most of their duffels already packed at that point. And we all just started bringing them down to the mudroom with the shoes by the garage.
But when he got to Friday, he just tried to skip the whole last day. He went right to that night when Kat went over. And authorities had already kind of thought it was strange when they first went to the Halderson home to question him, because he had all of these details, but all of a sudden had nothing when it came to his parents leaving, when they went to the cabin, who they went with. Like, how do you go from so much detail to nothing? And here he is doing it again, going from the last day he saw his parents to the next. I mean, he didn't even want to talk about what he did that day. So they had to like stop him. They're like, whoa, wait a minute. Nope, rewind, backtrack. We need to know everything, okay? You can't say I woke up at 6:15, they were gone, and then Kat came over late that night. Like, we need more details. And even then, what he gave them was very, very vague. Chandler told police that he had, quote, shit the day away playing video games. And then he went on and on about how he should have been doing other things like cleaning. And authorities were like, we were at your house like a few days later and it was completely clean. So, okay. It just seemed weird. Like he was filling it in with all of these details of what he should have done and not what he actually did. It's like he knew he wasn't giving them enough, so he was trying to fluff it. And then from there, he really had no idea the order of how things happened. It was like all of that Friday and Saturday were one giant blur, okay? But he was able to immediately pick back up again with crazy detail that Sunday the 4th. And he actually admitted to authorities that he had gone back to Kat's family's farm alone on Monday the 5th. He had no idea at this point when he is telling them this story what they've already found. Like they already know way more than he thinks they do. And he starts to tell them he went there because, like he told her family, his life was falling apart. He said that he wanted to be alone, he wanted to go get in the pool, and he said that he went and parked out by their shed and threw a fit like a toddler. Like he goes on to describe his fit, saying that he was kicking the ground and that he actually cried, and then he said he got in the pool and he left. Throughout his entire interview, he complained of his head. He asked for Tylenol, he spoke about his nerve damage again in that colostomy bag. It was like every chance he got to bring up his ailments, he took. And that...
We got all the background, I think, right?
Yeah, I think so.
So, I think it's time we start talking about what happened to your parents. Like the truthful version.
Okay.
Okay? So, we have like 20 pages of writing. We're going to start with a clean, white piece of paper for you to start telling the truth.
Okay. What?
Because listen to me. This is the only chance you're going to have to tell us the truth.
Okay.
Okay?
What?
Listen. I can't tell you what we know, but we know you're not telling us the truth. We know your parents are no longer with us. Okay? And we know the reason why. Okay? You need to tell the truth. Listen. You need to tell the truth about what happened and just tell us why it happened. Okay? If something happened, if you were defending yourself, or if you just got fed up with stuff, you need to tell us the truth. Okay? This is your chance to tell us why. Okay? I'm not BSing you. Okay? So can we do that?
Okay. You're okay. What happened? Okay.
You know what happened. We're not going to tell you what happened. You know what happened. You were there when it happened. We're not BSing you, okay?
I wasn't there when it happened.
We know more than you think we know.
I understand. But
There's people that have told us things. We have evidence. We have proof that more has happened. Okay. So your parents never made it to the cabin, and I think you know that.
Stand up.
You want to stand up? Just come right over here for me.
Do you have any in your pockets at all? Wallet. Just a wallet you just put in there. Oh. What's this right here? Faith in the coin, please.
And just like that, Chandler stopped talking and he demanded a lawyer. Right then and there, they charged Chandler with providing false information about a missing person because so far they had been unable to corroborate any bit of information that Chandler had given them about his parents, and that is a felony, okay? Now the next little bit was chaotic, as if all of this hasn't already been chaotic, but Chandler started to beg everyone to speak to a detective. He said he wanted to tell them everything, but they're like, legally, we cannot talk to you anymore. Like, you're the one who asked for an attorney. We have to stand by your rights. We can't speak to you without an attorney present. But he just would not drop it. He was so persistent and not grasping this at all. And he kept asking questions like, what changed? I need to know what changed in the last 24 hours. You didn't talk to me like this yesterday. What's going on?
There's a lot of crime scene investigators to be there in order for us to process every inch of that residence.
The criminal complaint says after asking for an attorney, Chandler kept talking, saying he wanted to go back and tell the detective everything. He added he, quote, didn't feel bad about what he did, and, quote, you don't know the whole story.
Photographs upon Chandler's intake also told a terrifying story because Chandler was covered in bruises all along the backside of his arms, and he had scratches all on the bottoms of his legs. And those scratches were at the same height as all the overgrown bush where the torso was found. Now, they didn't have enough at this point for further charges, murder charges, anything like that. The torso also hadn't even been identified yet, but authorities knew they had to hit the ground running to try to collect as much evidence as possible because at this point, everything was pointing to Chandler, and they didn't want him to get out on bail or something on these lesser charges and skip town or just have even more of an opportunity to clean things up because he had multiple days, if he had in fact killed his parents, to dispose of evidence, to create a story, and they didn't want to lose anything else. So on July 9th, they managed to get in contact with the friend that had gifted him that gun. Now, this guy claimed that Chandler had always expressed a desire to have his own gun, but he never said what exactly he wanted it for. So this guy ended up gifting him an SKS Norinco rifle. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, along with 480 rounds of ammo and 2 magazines. It was originally his own gun, but he's like, I only shot it like once or twice, and I wanted to give it to someone who would appreciate it. And Chandler seemed like he would appreciate it. He could have had no idea Chandler would potentially use it for something awful. But despite searches of the farm where that torso had been found and also the family home, so far no gun like that had been found, which was frustrating, but at the same time, it was also very telling because if he really wanted this gun, if this was a brand new gift he was excited about, he likely would have it somewhere with him in the house, but it was unaccounted for. July 10th, an autopsy was performed on the torso and it was formally confirmed. It was Bart Halderson. He had been shot in the back. And now this just opened, first of all, overwhelming amount of devastation for the entire Halderson family and all of their friends. But also it opened more questions like, where is Krista Halderson? So they decided to get another warrant to search the Halderson home for clues. Authorities ended up finding that a freezer they had not originally seen in the basement of the home was now sitting there empty. And when they tested the drain, there was blood. They also ended up putting luminol all along the basement floor and it lit up. And even more alarmingly, it was beyond obvious that someone had attempted to clean up the blood because the entire floor was just smear marks. And this was way more blood than what would have come from a small foot injury. They also found an empty bottle of the hydrogen peroxide, and they also found casings from the gun Chandler had been gifted along with 3 magazines hidden behind insulation in the basement wall. In the garage, they found a rope matching the rope that was tied around Bart's torso. They also ended up finding an axe behind some pieces of wood in the garage, and when they took a closer look, it appeared that there was blood right where the head met the handle. Surveillance from the neighbors had captured every single car that came in and out of the Halderson home over that entire weekend, and there was no couple that arrived to pick them up early Friday morning between 4 and 6 when Chandler claimed they were picked up. Instead, surveillance showed Krista coming home from work Thursday the 1st, and hours later, Chandler left to go to a local Quick Trip where he was seen grabbing a few bags of ice. And from there, Chandler's dad's Subaru was the only car that came in and out of the home other than when Daniel showed up to check on the couple and when Kat came over, and then obviously the sheriff's department once the couple was reported as missing. On top of that, more neighbors were continuing to reach out with strange things they noticed. One neighbor had taken a picture of the Haldersons' windows being open over that July 4th weekend. This window, I guess, or these windows had always been shut, like for the past 5 years. I think they were the basement windows, but do not quote me on that. And she just thought it was so strange that they were open. And I feel like you could argue maybe it was just hot. It was, July, midsummer there. Maybe they wanted to air out the house. I know that up north sometimes there is no air conditioning. I don't know if there's air conditioning in this house. But regardless, if you argue that, it made the next thing that was discovered even weirder. Halderson's home backed up to a pond. And on the other side of that, someone had surveillance on their backyard that pointed directly to the Halderson home. And in the early morning hours of July 2nd, they captured a flickering coming from the Halderson home. And this flickering of light went on for hours. And when authorities brought out professionals like experts, which by the way, it was crazy listening to this at the trial, found out that that flickering was coming from the basement window that looked directly toward the fireplace. Why on earth was the fireplace on at the Halderson home in the early morning hours, like 2 a.m., for hours in the middle of the night? Chandler wasn't talking at this point, and he was being held on $10,000 bail. And the DA had actually attempted to raise the bail to $1 million because they know further charges are likely on the horizon. But Chandler's attorney argued, they're like, he shouldn't even have any bail at all, citing he was a Wisconsin native and he was an Eagle Scout, so I guess that means he's just an angel. But ultimately, neither of them got what they wanted, and his bail was kept at $10,000 because you can't put someone on a higher bail because there might be charges later on. It would have to change at that point. And also, because of the sketchiness of it all, they didn't want to totally drop the bail. Again, because they didn't want to give him an opportunity to go and clean anything up. So authorities just continued to investigate because Chandler's not giving them a dang thing, and they wanted to keep searching for Krista. They needed to find what happened to her. K9 teams ended up coming and searching a nearby waste management landfill for a few days. I don't know if they were specifically looking for something. And they also took canines to the Haldersons' home. And the dog ended up hitting to that pond behind the home that we were just talking about. And so they're like, oh crap, we got to search this. And they even ended up draining the pond until it was at a consistent 5-foot maximum depth to help the divers search it more thoroughly and safely, but ultimately they ended up finding nothing. But inside the Halderson home, they just continued to find more clues that pointed to the unthinkable. That broken fireplace that Chandler claimed he hurt himself on while playing ball with his dogs was the same one seen flickering for hours in the middle of the night on the 2nd. And from just brief photos and like video clips that I've seen of it, which I will add what I can here, you can almost tell that it had been burning for so long because right above the fireplace, it looks like the coating was kind of like melted or scorched away. And authorities decided to take a deeper look at this fireplace. And sure enough, they ended up finding 200, let me repeat myself, 200 human bone fragments, including a skull, a jawbone. They also found a wrist bone in the fireplace that still had like markings on it that had been made by a machete or an axe. And so this lined up with what they'd found so far, that Bart had been dismembered and mutilated, and maybe this axe or machete had been used. And it also introduced this idea that if Chandler's behind all this, he tried to burn his parents' bodies first before ultimately disposing them somewhere else. They ended up finding more blood around the fireplace and even more bone fragments in the family vacuum cleaner. So clearly, he had tried to vacuum and clean things up after the fact. Again, he had all of those days to just cover all of his footsteps. And back at the farm, evidence was piling up as well. While they hadn't found any more remains still, they did end up finding a trash can in the woods. It was relatively clean on the outside, so it hadn't been sitting there in the elements for a while. It had to have just been put there. And inside of this trash can was a tarp covered in a reddish-brown substance that resembled blood. They also found, remember this, a Target bag stuffed with bloody rags and Brillo pads. And this Target bag had Kat's initials on it, matching the bag she said she used to bring over those cleaning supplies to Chandler. You guys, this poor frickin' girl. This poor freaking girl. All of these items were sent in for forensic testing, and the tools that had been found in that oil drum contained DNA from both Bart and Krista. And the tarp also had a piece of tape on it with Chandler's fingerprints, so they just kept on connecting him to the horrors of what happened to Bart and obviously Krista whenever they were able to find her. They were even able to find surveillance that Chandler had gone to purchase this tarp, or at least a similar tarp, from a local hardware store that weekend. Chandler's girlfriend was still helping at this point, and thank goodness she did, because she ended up allowing officers to download her whole phone. And this led to a crucial tip that ultimately led to Krista. Kat and Chandler communicated through text, but they also would heavily use Snapchat. And there had been, I guess, some trust issues in their relationship previously that led to them both frequently checking each other's location using Snapchat's Find My Friend feature. And so, for one reason or another, on July 3rd at 9 a.m., Kat went to check Chandler's location. And this was a Saturday, so she was shocked to find that early in the morning, Chandler was 45 minutes away from his home along the Wisconsin River. And the specific location that he was in was his favorite swimming hole. Like, it's a pretty remote area, overgrown. Only a handful of people, I guess, knew about it and enjoyed it. So she screenshot his location on the app because she had no idea why he would need to be 45 minutes away from home at 9 a.m. on a Saturday. But authorities felt that they had a pretty good idea why he was there. July 14th, they sent out a search team to scour the entire area along the river because not only had Kat provided them this piece of evidence that was huge, but they also had received a call from a local woman claiming that she saw someone matching Chandler's description walking away from the river at the same time that Kat screenshot him being there. Now, this search was not easy. The grass was tall, briar patches were super thick, which again could explain all the scratches on Chandler's legs. And just when they were about to call it a day, they decided to check just one more place. And they stumbled across human legs. One leg was mostly intact, and the other was in several pieces. And again, just like with Bart, obviously they couldn't formally say it was Krista, but based on the fact this was the second dismembered body they found in a location where Chandler had been, it was likely Krista Halderson. Dane County at this point started to put together new charges for Chandler. And by the following day, July 15th, 2021, he was formally charged with first-degree homicide and mutilating and hiding the body of his father. I honestly cannot imagine the level of confusion, anger, devastation. The list could probably just go on and on and on of how people felt hearing these charges. What Chandler had done affected dozens and dozens of people. People had dropped everything they were doing to come and make him dinner, to try and comfort him, to help and look for his parents, to give him advice. And not even necessarily because of who Chandler was as a person, but it speaks more to who his parents were. They would do the exact same thing for everyone else. So everyone had no hesitation doing all they could for them. And to know that the entire time he knew exactly what happened to his parents. He had used Kat and her family and his alleged medical issues to gain sympathy in order to have free time to dispose of a body on their property. Who does this kind of thing? Like, what mindset do you have to be in where this is even a thought, like where this even exists in your brain, this idea? According to the timeline, Chandler's parents were killed in the first into the early morning hours of the second, and he didn't move his mom's body until the third, and he didn't move his dad's body until the fifth. People had been at his house. Kat stayed the night 2 times over those days. And according to what authorities discovered, the blood in the freezer that magically appeared, he had likely kept his parents' bodies in there over those days while he just went about his life. All of the fake concern going neighbor to neighbor, it was never for his parents. It was for himself. All of the times that he had been begging police to know if something was found, or it wasn't to get answers for them, it was to see how close he was to being caught. The way that Chandler was so hesitant to let investigators go down into his basement is because that's likely where the crime occurred. That's where he had tried to burn his parents in the fireplace. That is where he cleaned up their blood after he dismembered them. And unfortunately, the bullshit just does not even stop here. July 16th, an autopsy was done on the legs that were found by the river. And while they still needed full DNA confirmation, all of the things pointed to this being Krista. The shoe size, the probable weight, and other details just lined up perfectly. So Chandler was also charged with the murder and dismemberment of his mother. And at this point, his bail was raised to $1 million. And his attorney had her words thrown in her face. And I probably got like way too much satisfaction hearing this. Chandler's attorney attempted this time to convince them that his bail should remain at $10,000. You know, after he killed and dismembered his parents and deceived everyone about it, lying to friends, family, and numerous authorities. And again, she cited him being an Eagle Scout. Like, that was her reasoning why. And thankfully, the DA hit back and was like, just so you know, the things that he learned from being an Eagle Scout were used to commit this absolutely heinous crime. At this point, Bart's cause and manner of death was determined to be a gunshot wound and homicide. But they never found any more of Krista's remains, so her cause of death was undetermined. They literally found nothing else. And that fact is just going to live rent-free in my nightmares for the rest of my life. However, the markings found on all of the bones aligned with those tools that were found in the oil drums, so they were still able to say this was post-mortem dismemberment, and she had, in fact, been murdered. As they awaited trial, authorities still had a few things that they had to figure out. For instance, what on earth about that text that Chandler claimed his mom sent? He showed it to police. Like, it physically existed on his phone. And so that was one thing just kind of messing up the timeline, and they didn't want there to be any doubt cast at all. That indicates that Krista's phone, it may have been Krista, it may not have been, sent a text on July 4th. But everything they had to connect Chandler to Krista's death, at least, was on July 3rd, which disrupts the entire timeline, okay? They also had found shoe prints, I believe, at the farm, and they were hoping to find matching shoes at the Halderson home. So on July 28th, 2021, they went back with another warrant. And as they were searching, they found a pair of shoes in the garage. And when they went to check if the treads matched, they found something in the shoe. Bart and Krista's cell phones and IDs wrapped in aluminum foil. This guy tried to create his own little mini Faraday bag, hoping that nobody would be able to track the phones. So now it's just all kind of starting to make sense. We already know why he didn't want authorities in the basement, and now we know he didn't want authorities in the garage because his parents' phones were there, not because the dogs would bark. And when the neighbors tried to comfort him, saying that the police could track their phones, this is why he was like, no, they can't. He had gone out of his way to try and block the signals, but thankfully he wasn't nearly as smart as he thought he was, because he went to all of that effort to try to hide these phones and block signals, and then he went and he used his mom's phone. Okay. Phone records showed that Krista's phone had died or been turned off in the early morning hours of July 2nd, but it turned on again on the 4th. Just long enough for that text about White Lake and that parade to be sent to Chandler. And when they pinged the phone, that text had been sent in the area of the Halderson's home. So he had turned their phone on, sent a text to himself, sat for a minute, and then texted himself back. Absolute madness, y'all. They also found even more disturbing evidence on Chandler's electronics. So the morning of the 8th, before any remains had even been found, he had made several Google searches, things like Wisconsin dismembered body found in Wisconsin, woman's body found in Wisconsin, Bart and Krista. And at that point, no one could have possibly known that Bart and Krista would both be found dismembered. Bart would be found actually later that day. Chandler ended up pleading not guilty, which I can't tell if I'm shocked or not about that. Part of me wanted to be shocked because I feel like I also just have way too much faith that people will do the right thing. And you would think that I would have learned by now, after being in true crime for 7, 8 some years, that that's not the case. But I really felt like he would end up owning up to what he did and move forward, because he had caused so much hell and trauma for everyone in his life and his parents' lives. I felt like it was just the least that he could do at that point, but he didn't. He wanted to keep fighting it. And in October, right before the trial started, they finally found the last piece of evidence that they really needed, the one thing they'd not been able to find so far. Somehow, at the barn on the farm property, investigators had missed Chandler's gun. It was hidden behind a handful of items in the barn, and Kat's family stumbled upon it while cleaning things up after the police finally released their whole property back to them. When they saw this gun, they're like, wow, this doesn't look like anything that we've ever owned before. So they ended up calling the police, and sure enough, this gun matched exactly the gun that was gifted to Chandler. Everything just really came full circle at that point. And by January of 2022, Chandler's trial began. And you guys, I know you're probably sitting there right now thinking, there's no way this can get even more ridiculous. Now would be a good time to take a second, take a bathroom break, center yourself, because it's wild. The entire trial is on YouTube, so you can go and watch it, but there were 57 videos in the playlist that I watched. It took me an eternity to watch it, but I do highly suggest, if you are interested in watching trials and understanding the way things work and hearing experts testify and explain things that honestly you've probably never heard explained before, I would suggest you go and check this out. And also just hearing from all the friends and family, I feel like it really helped to humanize Bart and Krista even more. But anyways, moving on to the trial, the prosecution had a very overwhelming amount of evidence against Chandler. They had a ton of witnesses and experts that they planned to bring to the trial, and they had even uncovered a potential motive. And this is what I was talking about when I said you didn't think it could get crazier, and I mean, it just is absolutely ridiculous, okay? Meanwhile, the defense brought forward no witnesses at all and basically just did minimal cross-examination the entire trial. It seems that they were going the route of hoping they could convince the jury there was reasonable doubt. There was nothing the defense brought forward the entire trial that was groundbreaking to me at all. They had no damning evidence whatsoever that disputed what the prosecution was bringing forward. And this is when Chandler's depth of his twisted lies and motive came to light. I am not even prepared to say this again, honestly. The prosecution found that Chandler had been lying to his parents and really everyone that he knew for at least the last year. And his dad had caught on to his lies just before Chandler brutally murdered him and Krista. Now, as I had stated in the beginning of the video, Chandler had been enrolled at Madison College from 2018 on. But when COVID hit, obviously things got a little sketchy and everything went virtual. So in September of 2020, his parents started to kind of, ask him questions about schooling. Everyone was just navigating things so differently and having to learn how things were changing at a very rapid pace back in 2020. And so they just wanted to make sure he was still enrolled, still doing well, despite all of these worldwide changes that were going on. Chandler kept reassuring them, like, yep, I'm in school, I'm doing great, everything is awesome. But his parents, specifically his dad, seemed to want more solid proof of that, and asked for his transcripts. Several email exchanges were found between Chandler and a handful of Madison College employees, and the same employees also had several email interactions with Chandler's dad. And all of these emails stated that Chandler was still doing great. His grades were good. He was set to graduate in the summer of 2021, maybe into the fall. Like, everything was still on track despite the chaos of the world that was happening. But Bart was still just not satisfied. He still wanted the transcripts. Like, he wanted solid, hard evidence. And when he started pushing for that, there were a few heated emails between Chandler and some of these school employees. And I believe this actually happened in June of 2021, so a month before his parents were murdered. And he basically was demanding his transcripts at this point. He was like, this is not professional. Like, I demand you give me my personal transcript information. And so Chandler and his dad seemed to be very frustrated that none of these employees were being very helpful. But Bart at this point seemed to be very suspicious of what Chandler was telling him, despite all of these emails. So he decided to call the school himself. Now, Bart called and asked for Chandler's current admission status and was shocked when he was told that Chandler had failed out of school. There was no Chandler Halderson in the IT program. The entirety of Chandler's schooling, he had either failed out of his classes or dropped them. And at this point, when he was dropping and failing, he was living outside of the house. He was living in his own apartment or the dorm room or whatever it may have been. There was no one really keeping tabs on him about it. And he was keeping it all a secret from his parents. And I guess when he moved in with COVID, maybe he decided, forget it, I'm going to drop out, or maybe they kicked him out. Whichever way it went, he just continued this secret and continued this lie. Prosecution said that when they started digging deeper into these emails, all of those emails were fake accounts. And every single one of them was traced back to Chandler's IP address. He had legitimately been impersonating these employees and arguing with himself. And he had been doing that for a year, you guys. When his dad started learning all this information about school, naturally, he started questioning all of the other things that Chandler had been telling him, like this employment situation where he was virtually working at this insurance company. And so this was looked into as well. And sure enough, Chandler had never been an employee there. And that job at SpaceX that he was so ready to move to Florida for, and not just that, he was going to uproot not just his life, but his girlfriend's life for, he never had that job. That job never existed. He'd never had an interview. He had no connection to SpaceX. It was all made up. And his dad had uncovered all of these lies. And Kat also testified, and it was, first of all, heartbreaking, and second of all, she said that she truly believed everything that he said. She thought that all of this was so real. They had even gone to bat for Chandler and tried to help him when he wasn't getting paid from that insurance company. When he was supposed to get his check at first, he claimed that it didn't come because it went to the wrong address, and then they helped him set up direct deposit, and then direct deposit for some reason wasn't working, and then he claimed that the company was angry because they accidentally agreed to pay him too much money. Chandler had even told people at one point that he worked for the dive and rescue team with Madison Police Department. Okay, spoiler alert, that didn't exist. Okay, there was no dive and rescue team with Madison Police Department. Kat spoke about how their whole relationship, he worked them hanging out around the schedule that he had with these jobs that he never actually had. He would say, oh, I'm on call this day, and this day for the dive search and rescue team, or I will be at training for an entire week. He would just get stuck in these lies and create more lies to attempt to get out of them. And honestly, I feel like that's not even the correct way to describe what Chandler was doing. I think he was having a great time. I do. I think that he had fun. He was getting creative with his lies. He wasn't getting stuck in them. He was like vicariously living through them, or I can't even begin to explain what was actually going on there. And then the icing on the cake. All of his medical ailments were also a total load of crap and have been likely used as a way to, again, lie his way out of why his other lies weren't coming true, like weren't physically and visually happening, okay? Whether he threw himself down the stairs or he just took advantage of an accident he had, who knows? Honestly, I would not put him past doing either. When Chandler had gone to the hospital for falling down the stairs, he complained of the headaches and nausea. He had pain in his neck. I mean, everything was pretty much following typical signs of a concussion. But the neck pain was obviously worrisome, so that's why they ended up giving him a neck brace and a CT scan. And the doctor that saw him came to testify at the trial, and he said that the CT scan came back clean. So when you have a concussion, there's not really a way to test for it. Like you can't do like a blood test. You can't get, a CAT scan, an MRI. Like there's nothing, an x-ray to say, oh yeah, for sure you have a concussion. It's more like, do you have consistent symptoms that line up with a concussion? And some symptoms indicate a worse concussion. But for things like a brain hemorrhage and nerve damage and things like that, you can definitely check for things like those. And he had none of them. Chandler had no permanent nerve damage affecting his legs and ability to walk like he had told everyone. He had never been told that he couldn't drive far or get on a plane, which is apparently what stopped him from getting that job at SpaceX. He was never told that he would need surgery that would drill a hole in his skull or that he would need a colostomy bag. He left that hospital diagnosed with a possible minor concussion. That's it. All of those follow-up doctor's appointments, he never actually had those either. He was told by the ER to follow up with his primary care and come back to the ER if his symptoms got worse. Unfreaking believable. So the prosecution stated it seemed like all of his lies, every single daggum last one of them, had started crashing down in June. All of these false realities that he had been busy creating for over a year, he had to answer for. And that day before his parents went missing on July 1st, 2021, his dad was about to call him on it. Chandler and Bart were set up to have a meeting at Madison College at 2 p.m. that day to discuss what was going on with Chandler's schooling. The last text Bart sent was to Chandler that day saying, quote, "I'm ready whenever you are." It is likely that Chandler knew he was being found out, so he killed his dad. I don't know if Bart had maybe, told Chandler he already knew and this was kind of like making him face the music kind of thing, or if they both knew the other knew and it was just becoming this like point of tension. But regardless, Chandler killed his dad for it. And when his mom came home, he killed her too. It worked the same way his lies had been for over a year, where he takes one bad thing and just compiles it with more bad things. It's an absolute nightmare. And then he concocted yet another web of lies to try to throw everyone off of what really happened. The trial, like I said, was so long and so many experts brought forward such great and informative testimonies. Everyone working this case really went above and beyond. Everyone from the sheriff's department that was looking into it, not just Dane County, but Langlade, where the cabin was. I mean, everyone was working their hardest and together to try to make sure they got justice for both Bart and Krista. And even the judge, John Hyland, was just absolutely amazing. It was definitely one of the harder trials that I have watched. Seeing all of their friends and family come up to testify about this amazing couple was heartbreaking. You could see their pain, and their fear and their discomfort even having to point out Chandler. Like, I understand it is a critical part during a trial, but when they ask the witnesses like to point out the defense, it is just, for some reason, it's like the worst thing in the world to me, having to look directly at that person and point to them and call them by name and say what they're wearing. It's just freaking awful, especially when this is a person who had lied straight to all of their faces and taken the lives of someone that they all very much deeply cared about. And when the jury went to deliberation, it only took them 2 hours to decide that Chandler was guilty of all 8 charges in relation to the murder of his parents. Chandler hadn't said a word the entire trial. He still was just acting like he didn't do a thing wrong. He was showing no remorse. He showed no emotion at all. He didn't testify. And he even attempted to submit a request that he not be present at his own sentencing. Thankfully, the judge said, quote, "The criminal justice system does not serve at the pleasure of convicted murderers. The defendant has no right to simply skip court hearings that might be uncomfortable or to avoid finally being held responsible for his behavior." And all I can say to that is round of applause. Chandler ended up being sentenced to life in prison, which was the mandatory sentence for the crime. So really the only thing that was up in the air at his sentencing was if he would be eligible for parole or not. And ultimately, the judge decided he would not be eligible for parole. That was not happening, saying, quote, "I cannot conceive of a way to fulfill my duty to protect the public that I serve were I to perceive that at some point in time, an individual who committed these crimes should be released back into that public."
Gravity of the offense, it's a consideration. The court gets to decide what that means. But you should consider that in my mind, in my experience as a prosecutor in this county, as a citizen of this state, I've never heard of a crime more serious. I've never heard of a crime more brutal. Mr. Halderson's mere presence in our community, the fact that he did any of this, has ripped apart the fabric of our community. The idea that someone can live amongst us with no warning signs and commit such heinous acts should scare everybody, and it sure as hell scared everybody here. No one who's interacted with Mr. Halderson will ever be the same. For whatever reason he decided to do it, whatever justification he can come up with in his own mind, whether it be today or down the road in many years, nothing will ever explain it. His actions in July of this year were evil. And for this generation and at this time, Mr. Halderson is the personification of evil in our community.
And at the sentencing, Chandler asked to speak for the very first time. And everyone was just waiting, on the edge of their seat, waiting to see what he would say. Would he apologize? Would he admit to what he did? Would he show remorse? But I hate to disappoint everyone, which I'm sure that was the overwhelming feeling in that room, was disappointment. He did none of that. This is what Chandler said when he finally spoke.
I know that in your memorandum, there was an indication once again that Mr. Halderson would not exercise his right to elocute at this hearing. Obviously, just as with trial, it comes up to a decision at the very last minute. I just want to ensure at this moment whether or not Mr. Halderson wishes to make a statement.
And thank you for doing that. That has changed. Mr. Halderson would like to give a statement to Your Honor.
You may remove your mask if you wish. I believe the conditions in the jail are and very good as far as the pandemic. So if you want to speak without your mask and Attorney Dorrell's comfortable with that, you could.
Absolutely.
Okay. And I would only ask that you read slowly, simply because my court reporter has to take down what you're saying, and sometimes we read faster than we mean to.
Your Honor, I want to take this opportunity to state my intent to appeal my convictions. If there are any lawyers listening and willing to take on my appeal, take a moment to please reach out to me. It's not that I do not have feelings. It's that I was warned to not show them due to the scrutiny of this case.
I have to, for this sentence, ensure that the only time Mr. Halderson comes back into the community is to have the privilege of a burial that he denied his parents.
Chandler only cares about himself. That is what he has shown throughout all of this. protecting himself, protecting his lies. Even after he sat and listened to all of the victim impact statements, his own brother testifying, his girlfriend, after watching his girlfriend's mom cry on stand, all of these friends, all of these people's lives he destroyed, he still only cared about setting himself free. The prosecutor said, quote, "Almost every homicide I've prosecuted, there's been a fairly tragic backstory of the defendant. Violence, drugs, just tragedy. You are often left with an explanation, not an excuse, but an explanation as to why a crime occurred. There's not an explanation here. Chandler grew up with a life of privilege." Those that knew the family spoke on how much this rocked the whole community, saying they knew Bart and Krista well enough to know that if Chandler came to them struggling, came to them worried about school, they would do what they had always done. Problem solve. Find a solution. Nobody could understand why he felt the need to hide all of this and just build the lies bigger and bigger, and why, when it came to a head, instead of facing them, he took his parents' lives instead. Their family remained pretty quiet throughout the trial, as I'm sure this was absolutely and still is horrific for them. When Bart's dad spoke, he had nothing but beautiful things to say about both Bart and Krista. Quote, "The world would be a much better place if they would have been allowed to gracefully get old." And I couldn't agree more. To see such loving people, such understanding people, people that have worked their whole lives to better themselves, their community that they were very active in, their children's lives, their friends' lives, they never should have that ripped away from them. It is such a tragic, tragic loss. In April of 2023, 2 of Chandler's charges were vacated, but don't panic like I did when I first read those headlines. I about wrapped myself. It's not anything crazy. It basically was just on procedural grounds and changes nothing, thankfully. So I don't know in depth enough about this, but apparently you only impose a conviction of hiding a body if there's not enough evidence to convict for mutilation of a body. And he was charged and convicted with both of those things, and you cannot do that. So they decided to keep the convictions of mutilation of a body, but not hiding a body. That's no more. Now, just months later, in September, something crazy happened, and it's apparently common, but so far I have not personally covered a case where this has occurred, so it was quite an interesting development for me. Chandler had a court-appointed attorney to handle his appeal that he so openly expressed he wanted. Michael Covey was his attorney, and instead of filing for an appeal, he filed a no-merit report. And from my very brief research into it, filing a no-merit report takes so much work and so much proof, because we have a right to an appeal if there's grounds for it. So if you're going to say, hey, I'm a court-appointed attorney and I've been told I have to help this man with an appeal, if you aren't able to do that, like, you better back yourself up. And so this attorney went through every transcript, every interview, every bit of evidence, every inch of the report with a fine-tooth comb, and could not find a single thing to fight with in an appeal. The evidence against Chandler was just too substantial. And I feel like this was so crazy to me because we've seen so many crazy things, like crazy grounds that attorneys will successfully use to get an appeal with or work towards an appeal with. And I mean, it can be the smallest thing, like juror number 7 had a history 30 years ago of XYZ. And like, I mean, it's things that I'm like, how did you even find this information out? So the fact that this attorney could not find a single thing, to me, just really speaks to the atrocity of the crime and the level of investigative efforts that went into the case specifically. I think they knew they could not leave an inch, a centimeter, or Chandler would try to wiggle his way out of it. So Chandler will likely not be able to try again for an appeal. I mean, he technically, I think, can still try, but the chances are probably the same result will come out of it. So he will be spending his life in prison for the horrible things that he did. I hope that Bart and Krista's family and friends can have and find some sort of peace, some way to appreciate their legacy and all of the positive ways they impacted everyone around them. They meant so much to so many people, and that is what needs to be remembered most of all. Their unwavering kindness, their consistent support and love, and also just their love for one another. Looking into this case, obviously, I wish there was some sort of like deeper psychological evaluation into this, because there is just something not right with someone who can do the things that Chandler did. Like, there's something psychologically I feel that could potentially be going on. But the other thing that like I could not help thinking throughout all of this is to hold the people that you love close. Again, me with like the cliches, but tell people that you love them. Never take a moment for granted, because you never know what could happen. You just don't. And you need to tell those good people in your life how good they are, because there might be a time where you're not able to. On that note, I'm going to go ahead and go, you guys. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to hear about Bart and Krista and all the beautiful things that they brought to the world. And I hope it encourages you to go and tell someone that you love them. Go and tell someone how special they are to you. On that note, I'm going to go ahead and go, you guys. If you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button down below to become a part of the Hallen fam, so that we can hopefully bring them home together or bring them justice together.